The brilliance of crystal cut into the eyes, reflecting the light of chandeliers like hundreds of tiny suns hanging from the ceiling. The air in the hall was saturated with the scent of champagne, perfume, and ostentatious prosperity. Guests moved slowly, gracefully, as if every smile and every motion of their hands had been rehearsed in advance. Behind their laughter, the hum of conversation, and the clinking of glasses, lurked a habit of being the center of attention, and behind their backs were those who made this glitter possible. Invisible, nameless, wearing gloves and uniforms. Among them was Marcus. He carried the tray confidently, his gaze lowered. No one looked at him, though he passed just a meter away from the guests. His steps were silent, his movements precise. Everything about him spoke of someone who had mastered the art of being invisible. Once, years ago, people had applauded him. His name had been printed on posters. His hands had touched piano keys not for money but for life itself. Music had been his breath. But now it was a different time, a different hall, a different role. He was no longer a pianist, just a servant. He had either grown used to it or convinced himself that he had. That evening, everything went as usual. The sound of live music blended with the murmur of conversation. The waiters moved along their meticulously planned routes. The hall sparkled, white tablecloths, golden utensils, vases with roses. In the center stood a Steinway grand piano, polished to such perfection that chandeliers and guests' faces were mirrored on its surface. Every time Marcus passed by, his eyes lingered on the keys for a moment. Deep down, his fingers remembered their coolness and softness, his muscles remembered the rhythm of motion. The music from the speakers was flat, soulless, just background noise. He longed to turn it off, to sit at the piano and show them what real music sounded like. But he had no right even to approach it. He did not know that this evening would become his moment of return. When he bent down to pick up a fallen glass, a few drops of champagne splashed onto the red dress of the woman standing before him, Victoria Whitmore, the hotel owner, a millionaire often featured in magazines. A woman with a dazzling smile and a cold gaze. The hall froze for a moment. Time itself seemed to slow down. Victoria looked down at the tiny stains on her dress, barely visible, yet in her eyes it was a crime. "Are you serious?" Her voice was low but sharp as steel. "At least learn to hold a tray properly." A soft chuckle rippled through the hall. Marcus straightened up, ready to speak, but she didn't let him. "Don't worry," Victoria said, smiling to her guests. "Everything is under control." Then, turning back to Marcus, she added, "Unless, of course, you'd like to entertain us? I heard you can play the piano." Several voices in the crowd laughed. "If you play better than my hired pianist, I'll marry you," she exclaimed loudly enough for everyone to hear. The hall erupted in laughter. Some even clapped. For Victoria it was just a game, a way to turn a minor incident into a joke and reclaim the spotlight. For Marcus it was humiliation. He looked at her calmly, without anger, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. "I don't want your hand," he said quietly. "But if I play better, you'll keep your promise." "Any promise?" she asked, her tone suddenly uncertain. The hall fell silent. The laughter died. People exchanged glances. Even Victoria lost her composure for a moment before smirking. "How interesting," she said. "Well then," Victoria said, "play. Just don't ruin the instrument." Marcus set the tray down on the nearby table and walked toward the piano. Each step came to him both easily and heavily at the same time. He could feel the guest's eyes burning into his back, hear the whispers, notice someone raising a phone to record him. But in his mind there was only one sound, the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He ran his hand across the lid of the grand piano, feeling the smoothness of the lacquer, and for a moment closed his eyes. In his memory appeared his mother's face, her hands fixing his tie before his very first competition. He inhaled deeply and sat down. "What will you play?" Victoria asked, lifting her glass. "Summertime," Marcus replied. "But not the way you're used to hearing it." He lowered his hands onto the keys. The first note sounded softly, almost hesitantly, but then came the second and the third. And suddenly the hall seemed to disappear. Only the music remained. The sounds flowed smoothly, gently, filled with deep emotion. It wasn't a display of skill or a performance trick. He played as if he were telling a story. A story about time, about loss, about himself. The voices faded. Even the waiters stopped moving. People listened. They didn't know who stood before them, but they felt it, something real. The music filled the space, wrapping around everything like warm light. It transformed the hall into a kind of temple, where every note was a prayer. Someone's lips trembled, another discreetly wiped away a tear. When the final note faded, a deathly silence hung in the air. No applause. No laughter. Only the sound of people breathing, afraid to shatter the fragile moment. Victoria was the first to speak, her smile slightly strained. "That was nice." Marcus lifted his eyes. "I'm not finished," he said quietly. He began again, this time M sonato. A fast, sharp, mathematically precise piece, yet every note carried pain and power. His fingers flew across the keys as if he were speaking to every soul in the hall, compelling them to listen, to understand, to feel. The music grew louder, stronger. It no longer came from his hands but from his heart. And when it ended, the hall erupted. Applause thundered. People rose to their feet, shouting, cheering, filming. Marcus sat still, motionless, as if he couldn't believe it was real. He looked at Victoria. She stood frozen, a glass trembling in her hand. There was no mockery left in her eyes, only astonishment and a trace of fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. "The one you never noticed," Marcus replied softly. "And you should have." Another wave of applause swept through the hall. People reached out to him, murmured to each other, filmed with their phones. He had played like a genius, yet he simply stood up, bowed slowly, and stepped away from the piano. In that moment, Marcus realized his past had not died. It had only been waiting for the right moment to be heard again. And now it resounded louder than ever before. Victoria, surrounded by her guests, stood still. She understood. The game that had begun as a joke had turned into her defeat, a defeat witnessed by everyone. Her laughter, once so effortless, now caught in her throat. And he, the former cleaner, had become the man the crowd followed with their eyes. A hero who reminded everyone that true talent never disappears, even when life forces it into silence. The music had ceased, yet its echoes lingered in the silence. And within them something essential rang out. Now everyone knew who Marcus Reed was. The applause went on, as if the hall itself sought to atone for its earlier laughter. Victoria remained motionless, still clutching her glass. Her face, flawless, refined, accustomed to admiration, had lost its confidence for the first time that evening. The crowd rejoiced, but her heart beat unevenly. She felt everything slipping out of her control, and that the man she had just humiliated had become the center of gravity. Every gaze was now fixed not on her, the hostess of the evening, but on him, the cleaner, the pianist, the genius. Someone in the crowd shouted with a hint of challenge in their voice. "Well, Victoria, time to keep your promise." A few others joined in, their voices laced with excitement, curiosity, and the thrill of impending scandal. Victoria forced herself to smile. She raised her glass as if she were still in control of the situation. "One melody isn't enough," she said loudly. "Let him play another." Marcus looked at her calmly. His gaze was steady, not defiant, but filled with something Victoria hadn't seen in a long time: dignity. "Agreed," he said evenly. "But if the audience admits that I'm better, you'll keep your word. No jokes." The crowd stirred, intrigued. "Let an expert decide," someone called out. From the far corner, a man with glasses and a neatly trimmed beard stood up. "I'm ready," he said. "My name is David Chen. I'm a music critic. I believe everyone will agree if I make the judgment." "Excellent," Victoria replied, tilting her head slightly. "Then play, Mr. Reed," David said. "Just read," Marcus corrected softly, and sat down at the piano again. This time the hall was utterly silent. No laughter, no whispering, only anticipation. He began to play, not cautiously but with inner confidence, as if reclaiming a long-lost voice. The music flowed freely. His fingers touched the keys as though they themselves knew what they wanted to say. The complex sonata turned into a story, of pride, of pain, of lost years. Victoria stood motionless, the glass trembling in her hand. She couldn't understand how she had failed to see in him something far greater than just a worker. When the music faded, the hall did not applaud immediately. For several seconds there was sacred silence. Then the first row stood up, and then the entire hall. David Chin rose and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. Professional level. Without a doubt. A wave of approval swept through the audience. People stood, applauding thunderously. Victoria didn't move. In her mind, his last notes still echoed, but intertwined with them was the whisper of an inner voice. You've lost. She forced herself to smile. One last piece, she said. Prove that you didn't end up here by accident. Marcus gave a brief nod. Then listen. He began to play the third piece, swift, powerful, with sharp transitions and a storm of emotion. It wasn't just a performance, it was a confession. He played as if every note burned through the years of silence. His fingers flew over the keys, the sound swelling, filling the hall to the brim. People held their breath. No one thought about their clothes, the champagne, or their status anymore. All eyes were on him. When the final note struck, the hall seemed to explode. People stood, applauding, shouting, bravo. Phones were raised, cameras flashed. Then suddenly a voice rang out. An elderly man in an expensive suit stepped forward. Mr. Reed, he exclaimed, I saw you some 15 years ago at the competition in Geneva. You were the favorite. The hall froze. A murmur swept through the crowd. That's the same Marcus Reed. The one who disappeared from the music world? Victoria turned pale. His name echoed through the room. Marcus gave a quiet nod. Yes, once. But now I'm just a man doing his job. The silence thickened. People exchanged glances. Some pulled out their phones, searching for confirmation. Then, from the corner of the hall, a woman in a maid's uniform stepped forward. Gloria, someone whispered. I know why he left the stage, she said loudly so everyone could hear. His mother fell ill. There was no money for treatment. He sold everything he could, then took a job here to pay the debts. And all this time he faced injustice. Because talent isn't enough if you don't have the right name or connections. Gloria's words struck the room like thunder. Even those who had been whispering fell silent. Victoria slowly turned toward her. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she said nothing. That's enough, she finally murmured, though her voice was dull and heavy. No, Chin interjected firmly. Let people know who they just listened to. It matters. Marcus raised his head. His eyes met Victoria's. All I want, he said quietly, is for people to stop being invisible. The words hung in the air, echoing in the silence. And then Victoria, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her, a hall full of people waiting for her next move, said softly, Very well. Let's go. They walked out through the side door, leaving behind a wave of whispers, camera flashes, and phones streaming the moment live. The corridor was quiet, lit by the soft glow of wall lamps. Only the distant hum of the hall could be heard. Victoria walked quickly, her heels ringing against the marble floor. Marcus followed her at a calm, steady pace. They entered her office. The heavy door closed behind them, cutting off the noise. The room smelled of leather, expensive perfume, and power. Paintings adorned the walls. A crystal decanter of water stood on the desk. Victoria walked to the table and turned to face him. Well, she said coldly. What do you want? Marcus stood by the door, his hands behind his back. Not money, he replied. An apology and something else. Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly regained control. What exactly? You will apologize publicly. Here, tonight, before everyone who saw you try to humiliate me. You will say my name and admit you were wrong. She gave a faint, uncertain smile. Is that all? No, his voice was calm even. You will establish a scholarship in my family's name for talented students who lack money and connections. And you will abolish the rules that make your staff invisible. You want a revolution? Her tone sharpened. I want justice. Silence. Only the ticking of a clock. Victoria walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. You realize this will hurt the hotel's reputation? I do, Marcus said. But refusing will hurt yours even more. She turned sharply. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Everything that happened was captured by dozens of cameras. Right now, the entire city is talking, not about your charity gala, but about how you treated a man the world just recognized as a genius. Her breathing quickened. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she slowly approached him. You think you've won? No, he replied. I just want you to make the right choice. They looked each other in the eyes. In that gaze was everything: pride, fear, defiance, and an odd sense of respect. Finally she exhaled. All right, Victoria said quietly. I'll do it. Will you go out there with me, to show you're still in control? He asked, a faint smile touching his lips. To show that we can end this with dignity, she replied. They returned to the hall. As the doors opened, the noise instantly died. Cameras turned toward them. The guests waited. Victoria stepped forward first, her posture perfect, her voice firm. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, tonight I witnessed not just talent but courage. I spoke words I should never have said, and I owe an apology to Marcus Reed. The hall froze. This man is an extraordinary musician, one I gravely underestimated. And I will keep my word. Tonight, on behalf of the Whitmore family, we are establishing the Reed Family Scholarship for young musicians and abolishing every rule that has demeaned our staff. The applause was thunderous. The employees standing along the walls trembled. Some wiped away tears. Marcus stood beside her silently. He knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. When the noise finally subsided, Victoria spoke softly to him. Are you satisfied? This is only the first chord, he replied. She looked at him and for the first time smiled, sincerely without armor. Then keep playing, Mr. Reed, she said. The world is listening. And he understood, this time it truly was